Hi, welcome back to Code Green Conversations for a Future We Want and Our Kids Deserve. And that's everybody's kids, even if you're not a parent. Maybe you have nieces and nephews and cousins or places you love, pets and parks, everything that we hold dear. All life is really threatened. And that was the case before this administration came in, this anti-science administration, the first time, let alone now. But it really is late in the game for so many ecosystems in distress, climate, oceans, wildlife, extinction, all these things you may have heard about, but maybe not so much on mainstream media, which is why I left corporate news because they just treat this like another issue. And it's not a marginal issue. It's the foundation that holds up all others, as one of my sheroes, the late great Donella Meadows, aka Dana Meadows, said decades ago. So true now, right? More than ever. So, without further ado, I am very pleased to introduce my guest today, Julian Reyes. He is with the Union of Concerned Scientists. He is a chief of staff there. Prior to joining UCS, one of my favorite organizations, he was a dedicated public servant for 9 years, serving in multiple roles, growing climate policies and programs from the ground up, and co-creating climate-informed resources with decision makers. I think I got all that in. The point is he knows what he's talking about, and he knows it is absolutely crazy to be attacking science. Who would have thought such a thing was even possible, let alone calling the existential crisis of our time, green scam, biggest hoax ever perpetrated, con job. And it needs to be refuted loudly and often. And so there is a march coming up this weekend, March for Science, Stand Up for Science. Tell us, first of all, how the Union of Concerned Scientists is going to be involved, what to expect, how people can, participate, and then we'll get into the insanity of attacking science.
Yeah, well, thanks again, Betsy, for having me. And for those who don't know, the Union of Concerned Scientists helps to put rigorous, independent science into action, developing solutions and advocating for a healthy, safe, and just future. As Betsy mentioned, I was working for the federal government for nearly 10 years as a climate scientist myself, and I just saw that these relentless attacks were just accelerating. The number of federal scientists who were being ejected from the institutions that we love and care about that also protect us, clothe us, feed us. It was just too much for me to handle. And so I'm really happy to be part of an organization that's fighting on behalf of science and scientists. And Betsy, in terms of Stand Up for Science, UCS is actually a co-sponsor. And so the event I can tell you about is in Washington, D.C. Our CEO and president, Dr. Gretchen Goldman, is one of the speakers for the rallies in DC. And so that's one way that we are participating on behalf of Stand Up for Science. We have also activated our science network, which is made up of 23,000 scientists, technical experts, and science enthusiasts. And many of those people in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area will be on the ground in Washington, DC. And we also have some UCS staff who will also be on the ground. But we are directly engaging at all levels of the organization for Stand Up for Science, not only in DC, but in other rallies happening across the country. I believe there's also one in Boston, and I believe another one in Denver. But those are the ones that we have on track.
San Francisco too, I hear. I hope
Yes,
so.
I
We
hope
kind of,
so too.
yeah, we kind of get it out here. We have our own, let's see, version of climate change in the in the form, if you can call it that, of atmospheric rivers. I grew up in the Bay
Yes.
Area that we're not supposed to get rain on top of rain on top of rain.
Mhm.
And of course, all the snow and avalanches, and people don't necessarily connect the dots between the extreme weather events and people dying. People assume, well, we've had avalanche danger before, we've had flood threats before, we've heard fires are coming before, but this is not your fire's flood, your father's floods or fires. This is a new era where we have to consider it's weather on steroids. And at a time like that, when we need information coming from federal government, when we need FEMA to be there in the aftermath, when we need leaders who get not only what's happening scientifically, but the urgency, instead we get a dinosaur in chief again. Uh, it'd be funny if it wasn't so serious.
Well, and Betsy, you mentioned these, the attacks on science, well, not only during the first Trump administration, but now during the second Trump administration. So I was around during that first Trump administration, and I was working on climate change at the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the program called the Climate Hubs, where we were providing farmers, ranchers, foresters, rural communities with climate information. They understood the climate was changing, and we provided that information in a way that was relevant and resonated with them. We probably talked to them about extreme weather rather than saying climate change, but they still got that there was something weird happening, right? There was no question about that. During that time, also during the first Trump administration, it was okay to be a part of a lot of these international UN groups that the Trump administration has also pulled out, such as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That was still a thing during the first Trump administration. I personally was also at the Department of State. We were still working with our international partners and organizations on climate change, even though we had left the Paris Agreement the first time around. And so it is just so striking that we have left these important international agreements to work on not only climate change, but environmental issues. And it just leaves a hole not only domestically, but internationally. And to me, it is just both sad and enraging, but I like to take a more positive spin on it, that it just means that there's a lot of work to be had. And I think not only that, but also we have some institutions to save in order to make sure that we are providing that climate science and information to the people who need it.
I say it's maddening and saddening and everything else, unfortunately, all the negatives, but it needs to be quashed, right? I mean, it's ecocide is what it is. If anyone hasn't heard that term before, it's kind of like suicide, but on a planetary level. And whether we know it or not, we humans are contributing to this. And the sixth mass extinction, the first one's caused by humans. You don't hear about this so much on the nightly news or even on MSNBC, CNN when they have 24/7 to cover all the news. It seems to be like, an afterthought still. We had more climate coverage now with Jeff Bezos wiping out the climate team at Washington Post, CBS, after taking years to get a climate team finally, no more. We know some of the reasons for that, but no legitimate reasons. And as someone who was in network news, left to develop an eco expertise, going back to pitch it because they weren't covering it enough and getting nothing but excuses, it's very concerning because if our media is not covering it, our federal government's not leading us anywhere except off a cliff. It really is up to us, up to people who love this place called home, our only, and nature. And, when you read the statistics about what's happening to birds and bees, let alone the things we can see, and under the ocean surface, so much is unraveling there, even though we can't see it. It's chilling, really. But it also, as you say, needs to be um, energizing.
Yeah, and Betsy, I wanted to pull out a point. You were talking about the places we love. You talked about ecosystems, talk about ecocide. I do want to mention that my most recent position was in the Department of the Interior at the Bureau of Land Management, or the other BLM, the more well-known BLM, as we were joking. But the BLM is basically a sister agency for the National Park Service, and both the BLM and the National Park Service, as you know, help administer and manage some of our most iconic landscapes in the United States. Think about Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in southern Utah. Think about Grand Canyon. Think about some of the most sensitive places, such as Glacier National Park. Some of those glaciers will be gone in my own lifetime, which is scary to think about. Joshua Tree National Park in Southern California, Acadia National Park. And that is a way to connect with people, hopefully, on why climate change matters and that it is affecting these natural and cultural heritage sites that people love and care about, and that the Department of the Interior, a federal agency, has been entrusted with preserving for current and future generations. And when you think about future generations, that should also probably include changes in climate so that it's available and accessible to our grandchildren, essentially. But I tell that story because the Union of Concerned Scientists recently entered into a lawsuit to challenge the censorship, erasure of American history, and specifically climate science at national parks. And national parks, as I recently learned this moniker, they are America's largest classroom because if you think about it, it's a really great place to learn about why nature matters, what is happening in nature, and then you're in the midst of nature. It's the best way to take up that science and that information. But anyways, we joined a coalition of other conservation organizations because we believe that it is important to preserve and share history, promote scientific literacy and access, and provide high quality interpretive materials at national parks, and that the censorship, removal of climate science information at Glacier National Park, that is just illegal. And this administration is actively erasing US history and science from our national parks. And as a former climate scientist at the Department of Interior, That's ridiculous. And that's just sad. Like we know the climate is changing, and erasing science will not stop the changes in climate. If anything, it blindsides us and our grandchildren will not see these beautiful, iconic landscapes because we refuse to accept the science and the impacts. And so I just wanted to mention this important loss, why I am proud to, on behalf of UCS, be a part of that and why we are fighting for this information to be in national parks.
Not just national parks, it's been deleted from all government documents online.
Yes.
Like, we can just get rid of the endangerment finding. It doesn't change the fact that we're endangered. We could just not put it in text, digital and otherwise, then we'll just pretend it's gonna disappear if they even acknowledge it at all. What do you call that besides stupid, ecocide? Don't you wonder sometimes what's their end game? Don't they have family members they care about? What is it, especially older, mostly older white men, sorry, who won't be around forever and their kids and grandkids will. What do they hope to accomplish? Ever think about that? I do sometimes late at night, but I haven't come up with an answer yet. Not a good one.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of personal opinions of what they're trying to accomplish, but I also primarily think it's a lot of chaos. There's just the speed, scope, and severity of the attacks is just overwhelming, right? And how do we respond to everything? And we can't. I am seeing staff members, even in my 2 months at the Union of Concerned Scientists, we are losing sleep over everything that is happening. And so, how do we make sure that our staff are actually healthy and able, like, get an amount of sleep, take care of their families while still doing our jobs, right? To promote science and decision making and support scientists amidst everything that is happening. And it's very stressful, right? And but we do the best we can. We're doing what we can, but it is so much, Betsy. But we take it one step at a time. We are part of this lawsuit to protect U.S. history, science, and national parks. You mentioned climate science and the erasure of climate data and reports. I was also an author on the fifth National Climate Assessment. Of course, they got rid of that primary website. I was also part of an interagency group that supported the National Climate Assessment. It was called the U.S. Global Change Research Program. They also got rid of that website and all the associated reports and important working groups that group supported. The U.S. Global Change Research Program was actually called for in legislation back in 1990, the Global Change Research Act. So it is congressionally mandated, and it was meant to help the federal government work together on global change or climate change issues across the federal government. We are better working together. So Department of the Interior working with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, NOAA, NASA, all working as one unit. And they simply dismantled that whole enterprise this past 2 summers ago. And it was just so sad to lose that institutional knowledge that had existed since 1990. And just think about, for rebuilding the federal scientific enterprise, that is completely lost. That's probably more than tens of thousands of cumulative hours of knowledge. It's probably hundreds of thousands, if anything, or maybe millions. And it's just really sad. And but my point is that UCS is at the forefront thinking about how do we re-envision a federal government that is not a single point of failure? What can we do now to push back and protect what we can now and protect some of that information, such as the National Climate Assessment, and helping others ensure that those data or reports on climate change and science remain online somewhere?
And what has happened to the scientists that have been fired across all these agencies?
Yeah, so from what I've seen, a lot of them spent a really long time looking for jobs. I think a lot of them ended up in non-governmental organizations, and so this is me just opining. I think that it's just been completely ridiculous on what has happened to federal scientists working in this space. Personally, I left on my own accord. I know of a climate change scientist at the National Park Service who took one of the deferred resignation programs or DRP. That person felt that if they left, that they would open up a spot for one of their younger climate scientists to be saved in case of a reduction in force. And that literally made me cry because that person had been on staff with the National Park Service for decades and left thinking that would protect their staff. I think that person who they thought they would save is still on staff, but that was really sad for me. Personally, I was working on climate science at the Bureau of Land Management. That completely changed in January of 2025. I ended up doing a variety of other things they needed me to do because people were leaving. They were just falling out, right? So they needed people to do managerial roles, other things. But from what I've seen, people have been landing on landing on their feet in different positions, but it may not have been in the climate space. And that's really unfortunate because we need those people, especially with their institutional knowledge of what they were doing in the federal government.
How concerned are you about young people who, students who might have been excited about taking environmental studies, environmental, science courses and thinking this is really, what I want to do in the world, and then seeing this happen and losing them before we
It's dev
even get their passion and education. And those of us who've been at this, while it does wear on you. But then once the problem is once you know too much, it's hard to quit. But hey, the good news is that the most passionate, positive people I know are those who are purpose driven, and none more than the climate crowd. So join us. It's the opposite of what, yeah, we get depressed. How can we not, more than ever, with this lack of leadership or leadership in the wrong direction? But it's really, it is such important work, and it is so urgent. Are you concerned, especially college students from, other countries with their craziness, with all the immigration stuff? We're losing a lot of our brain trust.
That's who we are. There was a recent science article that surprised me. The federal government has lost over 10,000 science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or STEM PhDs. I didn't even realize there were that many number of P and probably more. That's probably only the agency they interviewed and probably a full-time equivalents, not contractors. Think about that brain power, the collective brain power that has been lost due to our president.
Which we desperately need right now. That's
Yeah,
exactly
but
what's needed.
but if I
Starting with
were
them,
a
educate them. Jesus.
But if I were a bachelor's student back when I was an undergrad and I saw that, I wouldn't want to be in science, nor would I want to work for the federal government. And so and what happens to all those really curious, smart kids who do want to go into science? Where do they go? This has been a topic we've been thinking about. Like, what happens? What about all these amazing postdoctoral or doctoral fellowships through the National Science Foundation and the agency that's also being gutted, also being moved out so that HUD can have a better building with a better view? It's just a whole decimation of the entire academic pipeline, and it's a huge problem. And the Union of Concerned Scientists hasn't been able to rightly think about the entire issue, but it does. We definitely are thinking about it because it affects scientists who we protect and the science that needs to happen. Who's going to do the independent science at federal agencies or even outside? There will be a lack of that brain power. But it's a huge worry.
And how does extreme weather impact farmers and crops? And, for people, the few Republicans, MAGA types that I still know, well, CPI is up, GDP is, down, or up, like, well, what good is that, on a dying planet? Or, I say there's no, the eggs crisis is, minimal compared to the existential crisis. And by the way, food prices are not going to come down anytime soon. Look at what extreme weather does of all kinds.
The way we sold it during my time with the U.S. Department of Agriculture was that it was all about risk management. We already know we have droughts, we have deluges, we have huge floods, we have a more extreme rainfall. Why not plan
Derechos,
for,
who ever heard of
yeah,
derechos and bomb cyclones and
that's
snowmageddons?
right. That's right. It is in the best interest of farmers, ranchers, and foresters to plan for the extreme ends of possible precipitation or temperature swings. And they have always been doing that, but the range of possibilities has been expanding. And that's what they need to understand about climate change. But of course, climate change has become very political. But I think understanding that the range of possibilities has expanded is the way to connect with them, and that it's all about protecting their bottom line, right? Their economics. And that was the way we connected with farmers, ranchers, and foresters, was thinking about that bottom line, protecting their bottom line, but also so that they can continue to feed, and clothe the American people. And that was the way we kind of skirted around the climate change political hot potato. And of course, it was super easy to connect with them once we did that because they understand they steward the land on which they live, they are managing, they understand things are changing, and that they will plan for the unexpected. Because if you don't, then that's just not the way that you should be managing your land, truly. And so that was the way we worked with farmers and folks on the ground. We also talked about crop insurance and why, thinking about extreme weather is better in terms of ensuring your crops are insured, but also from the fact that, if you don't consider climate change and crop insurance, the federal government is on the hook for hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's another thing that hasn't been talked about. And so there were multiple ways that we connected with agriculture, natural resource producers on the topic of climate change, which I thought were pretty successful.
And their crops are our future food.
That's right. That's right. And I think that they also should think about how they want to leave that land for their children and their grandchildren, be able to continue to feed us and the world. And I think that's another way to think about it. If you expect more floods, then you should protect your land against more floods, or think about different crop varieties that can withstand, more, let's say, like heat tolerant varieties or drought tolerant varieties. It's just that to me, just having that knowledge on climate change impacts is just so essential. Just managing your land, just planning for the future. And we all do that in all other facets of our life. And so it's just crazy to think about that we wouldn't do that when thinking about future changes in our environment.
Mhm. And do you suspect or do you hear about farmers and ranchers who may be regretting their vote for Trump? I imagine
I
that. I hope
I
so.
I have seen some articles about that. I won't opine on that personally, but I have seen some articles on that. But I think it is still important to provide information that is relevant for decision making, where the policymakers or even, the American people, if the federal government isn't going to do that, someone else will step in, whether it's a union of concerned scientists or other non NGOs in the space.
Hmm. And sometimes I sound like I'm just anti-Republican. No, I'm anti-science. It just so happens, and I don't skirt around this issue because I've been covering it too long. The Republicans really started this. They politicized climate change. So when I hear people say, "Oh, well, both sides do it," and and all of a sudden, fake news, there's no credibility, and a really bad time to not believe the credible news media that is out there. That's why independent uh, content creators need to be supported. A little plug there. Because if we're not going to get it from, CNN, MSNBC, even the liberal network, where are we going to get it? And Fox, not news, has been and is still at disinformation campaigns, and we're seeing they're reaping their rewards, put funding all this. So Murdoch, all decade for decades, Hillary was right. There was a vast right wing conspiracy, and there still is, where unfortunately progressive media doesn't get the same, and what could possibly go wrong. So it's no accident, and it's not both sides. I'm sorry, and I would be for any Republican politician who speaks out against the party on denying this reality. But there aren't enough of them. There really aren't. Not one, I remind listeners, viewers, not one voted for the Climate Act, Joe Biden's incredible effort to start to reverse course. Not one. That's shameful. And of course, things haven't gotten much better. Uh, but the positive is, I think people are starting to see the kind of ugly underbelly of what where greed and power hungry leaders can take us, not in our interest, not in public interest. And hopefully there will be a backlash, and starting with marches. It does matter when millions of people, get out in the streets and vote with their feet, and we'll see what happens in the midterms. But I don't think people realize just how urgent things really are in terms of ecosystem collapse. I mean, if you read what I read every morning, hard to get out of bed. That's just before I've, brushed my teeth. Um, and not everything is reversible. And there's a
Yeah,
domino effect and a feedback loop.
Yeah, and Betsy, I wanted to tack onto your earlier point about climate change as a non-partisan issue. UCS would agree to that, but also we say that science is a non-partisan issue. Science is
Indeed.
science. But I earlier mentioned the Global Change Research Act of 1990, which helped provide the foundation for the National Climate Assessment. Fun fact, that was actually passed by the Senate back in 1990 on a 100-0 roll call vote, back when I guess climate change was acceptable and now it isn't. So I just wanted to mention that that act, which still is a law on the books, it still exists. And so if folks, want to take a look, that is what provides for the National Climate Assessment, which is legislatively mandated. Um, yeah.
The other thing that is so maddening is you see Lee Zeldin, head of the Environmental Plundering Agency under this administration, proudly saying, biggest deregulation, success in decades. They don't even pretend they care about clean air and clean water, which they claim to. That was always their buzzword when they didn't want to mention climate. No, they don't. They're making for putting, we've been talking about climate. Let's talk about all the pesticides and forever chemicals that they're loosening restrictions on that absolutely impacts our health. I had my blood tested and was shocked to find out, as healthy and green as I like to think I am, and our family is, 7 different PFAS in my bloodstream, which means I probably passed it along to my daughter and her daughter, my granddaughter. And they're forever chemicals. They don't come out, and they do contribute to cancer and infertility and brain fog. And they're they're not even hiding the fact that they're saying, "Yay, we're going to make it easier." Too many regulations, too hard on industry. Clearly selling out to the chemical industry, big oil, at our expense.
Yeah, to that point about the endangerment finding, the UCS did join a lawsuit, I think headed by Earth Justice, actually, on filing suit against the Trump administration for unlawfully repealing EPA's endangerment finding. And so we are a part of that lawsuit as well, as another way to kind of fight back on the Trump administration's kind of egregious attacks and activities on the anti-science activities. It's just we have to use every tool we can in the toolbox.
And the nerve that, they put together this bogus, climate group of
Oh,
known, climate deniers and shills for the fossil fuel industry. They think we're pretty dumb, don't they?
yeah, but we're also pretty smart. So UCS actually partnered with the Environmental Defense Fund, and we sued on behalf of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, I believe, so FACA, and we actually got that information on which they were what they were talking about, and a lot of those documents will be released publicly soon, I believe. But we won in court because what they were doing was illegal, and that secret climate working group was supposed to be like the U.S. Global Change Research Program, but it wasn't. And so I'm happy to say that we won against them. I don't know if that I think the climate working group was disbanded, but you're right, it was totally bogus. And it was just like four or five people meeting in secret, which is ridiculous under one agency, the Department of Energy. Right. And I talked about the US Global Change Research Program. Climate change doesn't affect just one agency, it affects all departments and all people. And so just kind of that fact that they were so narrow-minded and thinking about how they would discuss climate is ridiculous. But anyways, just happy to say that we did join with EDF and we did get the documents under FACA from the Climate Working Group. And so more soon on that.
And the fact that hundreds of credible scientists, protested, saying in the public testimony that no, you can't, reverse this. And they completely ignored that. People put real time and energy. I put interviews devoted to that, and they just ignore it. It's the slap in the face and then some. So we need to fight back because I don't want the bad, stupid guys to win while we good guys don't get hurt, which is why I do what I do. And it's been a long time, and just want to make a little plug if I can for Code Green. I have been doing this labor of love for almost 3 decades on my own time and dime, but those dimes are out. So we are doing a pledge fund for the very first time. I'm asking for donations. If you go to betsyrosenberg.com, the money doesn't go to me, it goes to Code Green to pay for production. I used to travel to a lot of climate conferences. Luckily, there's a lot on Zoom right now, but there are expenses. And if I wasn't married, I couldn't do this. But even my husband is saying, enough already. I told him in 2006 when Inconvenient Truth came out, honey, this will change everything. Al Gore is going to tell the world. That was 20 years ago, still waiting. But it's not about me. Those of us who are dedicated to this work feel like at least we're on the right side of history or left side. We can look ourselves in the mirror. We can, well, not sleeping so well lately. I'm okay getting to sleep. It's when I wake up in the middle of the night and I think about the joy that my granddaughter and every child brings into this world to those who love them. But then the dread that comes with it, then I really get mad. Like, this shouldn't be, right?
That's
Uh,
right.
yeah. So anything you'd like to add before we close?
I just want to thank you, Betsy, for allowing UCS a voice on this platform and for talking about the anti-science attacks and what UCS is doing. I just wanted to add that, we're not in this alone, right? Where you meant to stand up for science, there was a movement, right? And kind of pushing back against these authoritarian actions and protecting health, defending democracy, making sure science at the decision-making table. But that story that I told you about at the National Park Service, I just want to remind everyone that, America has these iconic landscapes, these national parks, and just think about the wonder and awe your kids, your grandchildren, when they're in the middle of a national park, and think about what would happen if appropriate U.S. history and climate science is not available to them. These are areas and opportunities for children, for ourselves to learn about our own history, and science in a way that is very easy and accessible. And it's just so sad and a missed opportunity to make sure that we understand how to protect and preserve our most iconic national landscapes. And that's just one example of how we can push back against this administration. But and these national parks are just one tiny example of what could be lost during this administration, and that's a huge loss. Think about Grand Canyon. Think about never seeing Glacier National Park. It's just sad.
Cue America the Beautiful, above the spacious skies, and you cry. Nature is a terrible thing to waste. There is no planet B.
Yeah.
And ignorance is a really bad reason to lose a perfectly good planet. And all the critters, they don't, and I feel so, they don't know what's going on. They don't know why it's having, we were living in Texas for 7 years. We were there for that freeze, or why it's way hotter than it should be, or birds are dying from all the fire smoke. And that makes me cry. But it also makes me motivated. And please, please, please go to our new updated website. You can get there from betsyrosenberg.com or codegreenmedia.com, although there's a Code Green Media wrapper. That's not me. And sign up. Please subscribe and please watch these interviews with these wonderful people who give their work and their lives to this and time to Code Green, to educate, to inform, to inspire. Even if you watch it on loop over and over again, we need to get up to about 1,000 subscribers before we can get sponsors and partners like maybe Union of Concerned Scientists. And then watch out, because I have no job or paycheck to lose, as I often say. I'm very bold and outspoken, and we all need to be. Just need to let the world know we're out there. So thanks for doing your part to help us with your experience, your expertise, and your passion. I know it's there, even though you're calm. It's there, and really wish you greener times ahead, and also a fabulous turnout this weekend. Let's hope. Many people may be watching this after the March for Science, but there will be more. And even if you couldn't get out there, let folks know that this is something that's very important to you, and find a way to volunteer, or maybe do a little recycling of your career like I did, going from news to environmental news. You'll feel better, and it really does get rid of. We'll say get rid of. It reduces some of the anxiety when you're taking action. That's my little
Thanks for
plug
having me.
for the
Thanks for
day.
having me, Betsy. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And you'll be out there marching, right?
I will be. I'll be there with Gretchen,
Okay,
another UCS staff in our network.
terrific. Thanks so much, Julian.
Thank you.